very few people come to each other's defense within a cult, because then they're going to be on the hot seat. They can't risk it. So you don't get support, and you're on your own, and you're kind of dealing with this by yourself.
Yeah.
I think also, and it might seem like a leap, but I just thought of Hitler. I just thought of how, in order for him to get people to not have their conscience triggered when they were killing millions and millions of people, he needed for people to see the victims as subhuman, calling them vermin, that they were somehow a threat. They were a plague. They weren't people. And I think if you can shift how people see others and reduce them in other people's minds, then I think a lot of bad things can happen to them, and no one steps in to protect them, and no one thinks that really something is happening that's really wrong and should be stopped.
Very true. It just occurred to me, in fact, I try to shy away from, I think it's called Godwin's Law, the thing on the internet where, you give it enough time and eventually any argument or any case being made by somebody will eventually be compared to the Nazis or to Hitler, right? This is just a thing on the internet. I think they call it Godwin's Law. But with destructive cults in particular, it so easily lends itself to comparison because Hitler was a destructive cult leader. And his methods and the way his inner circle operated and the things that they did were a case study of a destructive cult and a very blatant and very large-scale operation. And those techniques and all of the things that were done psychologically, emotionally, to manipulate people, and of course physically, and in the end, killing people, are all techniques that are used by destructive cult leaders today. Because those are not because Hitler did it,
right?
Not even because Hitler invented it. They're used because that's what works. That's what people respond to. They respond to those, those antagonistic appeals to emotion when they can find a target that's not them as a reason to blame their troubles or failures on or something, for example, just as one example. And we see that with Donald Trump right now. Just to, ride a little hobby horse there on my dislike of that man. But I see him playing the crowds the exact same way that, I'm not the first person to make the comparison to Hitler, right? And when you appeal to people's baser emotions as a reason to be followed, you're using a cult leader technique. Martin Luther King was not a destructive cult leader, and yet he had millions of people willing to listen to what he had to say and follow him. And there is in no way, shape, or form was Martin Luther King a destructive cult leader. He did not have the traits of a destructive cult leader. He had the traits of a great leader, and he was responsible for tremendous social reform and civil rights reform. That's not what destructive cult leaders do, right? And Martin Luther King didn't use destructive cult leader techniques in appealing to people. Right? He talked about freedom and liberty, and he meant it. Hitler talked about freedom and liberty, but he talked about freedom and liberty by persecuting a whole class of people. And let's direct hatred toward that group of people, And there's I'm just making a black and white comparison there because I just kind of got off on this, but it's, you bring up Hitler, and I think that's a reason. I think it's not necessarily Godwin's Law at work here. I think it's a valid analogy.
Right. I also am not so overreactive that I compare everything to Hitler, and like.
No, it's the first time you've ever said anything about the man. So.
Exactly. Like, oh, my mail is late. My mailman must be. No, I don't
male Nazis.
Male Nazis. Exactly. I've heard of those. It's a new cult. But if we study if we study Hitler, yeah, we're studying cults. We're studying the drama that he created by having these rallies, by having kind of gatherings at night with bonfires, and having it be where you are connected to what's happening, and you have a adrenaline rush that is also multi-sensory. The visual is very powerful of having everyone in lockstep, and having the sounds of the music, and again the bonfire and all of that. It is a rush, and you feel like something important is really happening. Different from Martin Luther King, who was responding to something that was really going on. Hitler was manufacturing an issue. He was using magical thinking to create a problem that didn't exist, right? He was responding to the fact that people were having a hard time financially at the time, et cetera, et cetera. But there wasn't a problem of Jews and homosexuals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whoever he thought was less than, somehow creating something that would be dangerous for the whole world and would keep the world from being able to continue as it should. So he created an issue and then said, I have the solution. Now I can help you. It's like cults where they knock you down, but they want you to forget about that part. They only want you to remember when they reach their hand down and help you get back up. They want you to then feel indebted to them for helping them. But you didn't actually need help to begin with. They just made you think, right? Taking the personality test. Oh, this is these are all the things that are wrong with you. No, but you then, if you can be convinced of it, then you do need their help. And then you feel indebted and you need to pay back. So Hitler was protecting the world from some imaginary threat. But I think also he did a lot of things that were very controlling that cult leaders do. Public shaming and public criticism, shooting people who he felt had betrayed him, who were major players in the Nazi movement. You knew that you were on shaky ground and you had to do exactly as he said. I think the other part, though, is that because he used this kind of magical thinking, people couldn't really prove it or disprove it. And they just wanted to go along with someone who was charismatic. And cult leaders are charismatic. I mean, I've met a few cult leaders, and some are very odd, but they are charismatic to a whole group of people. But this is also why conspiracy theories are so popular, because there's something where you feel like there's danger out there and it's lurking, and unless you're on top of it, unless you know what's happening and what people are up to, then you're never going to be safe. And Hitler offered people that. I mean, his whole agenda was a conspiracy theory.